Today's show's one of our popular question and answer days, but this one's with a difference. I guess it's a bit more like a speed dating session. Not that I've ever had a speed dating session, but today shows the audio of a special Zoom session I recently held with a small group of clients and prospective clients of Metropole who asked me their most pressing questions, but a quite wide range of questions about our economy and about our property markets. Now, I only had now to cover more than 15 questions, and that's why I call it a bit like speed dating. But I'm sure you've thought of some of these questions, you've had some of these questions on your own mind, so hopefully I can give you some clarity. So welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
A lot of people asked about what's ahead for the property market, and have we reached the bottom yet? And the bottom line is no, we haven't reached the bottom yet. What I think is we're here now in October 2022, and I can guarantee something. In 12 months' time, we're going to be in October 2023. And the other thing I can guarantee is that in time, the markets are going to change. At the moment, fear is the main factor, fear and confusion rather than, I guess, greed. So 2 years ago, and I'm not saying greed nastily, people were in just such a hurry to get into the market. Prices were booming. We had a once-in-a-generation property boom. So lots of people took quick decisions. They were in a hurry. They didn't want to miss out. And so let's use the word greed drove the markets, and now fear has. But I believe between now and sometime next year, and let's say 12 months' time, we're going to cross the survival line. Greed's going to overtake fear again. People are going to realise that, hey, interest rates have reached their peak, not going to go any higher. Or inflation, it's under control. And so the pent-up demand is going to move and the markets are going to move again. But between now and then, in 12 months' time, you can be in, I guess, one of three positions. Some people are going to get out of the market. They are. People are selling up. People are nervous. They were doing it during the boom times. They said, oh, look, property values are going up, I'm selling. No, that's why you bought the property, so the property would go up in value. But some people are going to, I guess, unfortunately miss out. Most people are going to just tread water, stay where they are, keep an eye on the news, sit on the fence, and eventually they're going to do something, but they will have missed out because 12 months later, 12 months is gone. And there's going to be a small group of people, and we're seeing a lot of them as clients of Metropole, who are actually taking action. They're getting their finance under control. They're putting a plan into place. They're getting the structures, if it's appropriate, to own their properties, and they're actually taking advantage of the market. And so I'm going to encourage you to be in that third group of people who are playing the game. Some are actually just sitting on the sideline and some are getting out of the game altogether. But I'm playing the game. We're just finishing 2 townhouse development in the suburb of Melbourne that I'm keeping, I'm not trading, and another one in Brisbane that we're about to start, and there's another one in Melbourne we're going to start as well, because the market doesn't bother me as much. So I guess what I'm recommending for you, and I don't know your circumstances, is to at least be open to playing the game rather than sitting on the fence. So to answer the question that a number of you have asked, have we reached the bottom? No, but the market hasn't bottomed. But we're not buying the market. I believe that interest rates are still going to probably go up twice more. The Reserve Bank in October only went at 0.25%. It's waiting to see what's going on. But it's also showing that, hey, we're getting there. We're on the way to slowing things down. So later this year, inflation is going to peak, or maybe early next year, but it's going to be higher for the next couple of months. We know that. That's happening overseas, so we're importing some of that as well. And at the same time, interest rates are going to go up once or twice more until things come under control. But our sense on the ground and with inquiries at Metropole at the moment is that more and more people, the last couple of weeks, more inquiries than ever, because I think people have sort of said, okay, well, this is it. I now accept it. I'm going to factor in a slightly higher interest rate. I'm going to be careful to select the right properties so the market downturn isn't going to affect me. And they're seeing a window of opportunity. And I see that not because the market's cheap, but I think when you look back in 3 years' time, you're going to see, it was cheap. But it arises because currently consumer confidence is low. And currently most prospective homeowners and investors, they're just sitting on the sidelines. However, as I said, I think early next year, when people realise that's as bad as interest rates are going to get. Inflation's reached its peak. The Reserve Bank's got things under control. They're going to get back into the market. And the fear of missing out is going to come back. FOMO is going to come back, and the fear of buying early is going to disappear. Now, interestingly, we saw a similar window of opportunity back in 2018-19, before the federal election, when people sat on the sidelines. Wasn't that long ago, but the market really, really slowed down, and the Sydney market dropped 10%, more than it's dropped now in 2017-18. Melbourne dropped about 6-7% then, and then the market turned on again. Look what happened to prices since. Much the same at the beginning of COVID, but boy, that was a very different time. The global financial crisis, I remember that well, and I saw it in 2002 during the tech wreck. History's just got a way of repeating itself. And the first time I experienced this in the 90s, I was worried. There was a recession in the 70s. I'm not sure I realised at the time. But strategic investors take advantage of these opportunities, and they will over the next couple of years to maximise themselves and protect their downside. But a big, big factor is consumer sentiment. And consumers are nervous. But if you put that aside, in general, the fundamentals are good. The economy is doing well. In fact, too well. The Reserve Bank wants to slow it down. Unemployment is really low. To anyone who wants a job's got a job. People are coming to Australia. The borders are open, but there's just not enough accommodation. We're not going to have an oversupply of properties because, in general, we're just not building enough, and we can't afford the new developments. Aren't financially viable at the moment. The cost of building all those new developments, the market's not going to wear it at the moment. So we've got to wait for the market to pick up. So there's no worry about oversupply. And the media currently is going to keep scaring people for a while. So it's a good time to get involved because it's a buyer's market. So take advantage of the negotiating opportunities. It's a buyer's market. So take your time to do your homework and research, because eventually the media commentary is going to change. So at the moment, the cloud of consumer lack of confidence is covering up the sunlight of all those good, strong fundamentals. And when the cloud lifts, buyers are going to feel more confident. They're going to re-enter the market. Property prices are going to stop falling. Vendors are going to put their properties on the market. And so for a while, prices will stabilise. And then they're going to slowly start to lift up. And the media is going to start telling us good news stories. Auction clearance rates are up. Property values are holding, rents are still going up, rather than trying to scare us with real estate Armageddon. And I'm suggesting if your circumstances are right, you should actually getting involved in the market. Because if you take away consumer sentiment, Australia's housing and economic fundamentals are strong. Households are cashed up. They've got equity in it. The job market's good. So people also ask the question about recession. Are we going to fall into recession? And the answer is, you probably forgot, 2 years ago we had a little recession. A recession is when we have 2 periods of negative GDP, negative economic growth. In other words, the economy didn't grow as much. There was one quarter when it was really small growth, and then there was one with a bit more growth, more negative, I should say, during COVID. We had a recession. Didn't change your job, didn't change your life. So as long as you've got a job, recessions aren't a real worry. And the Reserve Bank's going to try and avoid a recession, but I'm not sure that that's actually, I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but it doesn't particularly worry me because it's not going to be the sort where there's going to be huge unemployment. So in summary, I'm not going to answer all the questions as long as this, but spring follows winter. It has for thousands and thousands of years. Summer will follow spring. This too shall pass. And the long-term uptrend of well-located properties and increasing their value is going to continue. I'm putting my money on it, and my recommendation is if you're in a sound financial position, you should be buying when others are sitting on the sideline. I know it feels a bit strange. I know it's a bit counterintuitive to buy in a correcting market, but there are many valid reasons to do that. And history just keeps repeating itself that it's the right thing to do. So why would you wait? Well, I think some people are going to wait because they're going to say, hey, I can save more for my deposit. And that's probably true. But with rising interest rates, you may not have the same serviceability. So you're saying, oh, yeah, but if I can't borrow as much, if I can borrow 20% less, the market's got to fall 20%. No, it doesn't. Imagine you've got a borrowing capacity of $1 million and now it's only 800,000. And that's happening to a lot of people. And imagine I'm trying to sell my property for $1 million. I'm not going to meet I don't have to. I don't have to sell my property. I'm not desperate. I've got a job. So I don't have to meet the market and drop my price 20% for you. You're going to have to find somewhere, if you want to buy, that you can live in. So you may go a suburb or two down, which is cheaper, or you may buy an apartment or a townhouse or a villa unit rather than me dropping the market. So who am I going to sell my property to? The guy who was going to buy in the next suburb for 1.2, 1.3 and can't now. So they're going to move. The ripple effects are going to continue. Now, I'm going to have to drop my price a bit. I'm not going to be able to get an exorbitant price. But if I've got a good property, I'm going to drop it where they are at the moment, but not needing to do it a lot more than that. So if your serviceability is going to decrease, maybe it's a good time to get in now. And you're not going to time the market. No one has ever been able to. And it's not the market you're buying. So my suggestion is at least explore your options. So why should you buy now instead? Well, I think it's, as I said, it's a good time to take advantage of a buyer's market. So, sorry, that was the first really long question. The next one was a question about, and Mark asked, should we keep buying negatively geared properties or go for cash flow for your next property? Now, since I don't know your circumstances, and I'm not only answering this for Mark, but for anyone else who's wondering about that, the answer is it depends on what stage of your property journey you are. So a property is not necessarily cash flow positive or cash flow negative. So the answer to you, Mark, is it depends upon your finance. If you had $1 million cash and you just bought the property, it's positively geared. If you've got to borrow 100% or more because you're borrowing costs, it's going to be negatively geared. So it really depends in the middle. So the point I'm making is it's not the property, it's the finance. But a lot of people are looking for cash flow because they're thinking about the here and now rather than the long-term buying the right property. So in general, wealthy people, the affluent investors, buy for capital growth. Now, I assume that the people on this Zoom call are subscribing to my podcast as well. This morning, I did a recording with Stuart Weems, who I had chat with once a month, and he did he's an analytical person, he's an accountant, numbers and figures, and he showed that over a 30-year period, the difference between buying a high growth property and a high cash flow property could be $1 million extra in cash flow and capital growth if you buy a high growth property. A whole lot of numbers and figures. I'm going to, if you watch out for it in the Michael Yardney podcast coming out in a few weeks' time, that particular episode, I'll give you a link to that, but it's also in one of the blogs on Property Update, that in the long term, capital growth is the way to get out of the rat race. You definitely need cash flow to stay in the game, but capital growth will also lead to stronger rents in the future too. But how do you cover yourself with the lower cash flow at the moment of higher interest rates? And we recommend our clients go to finance strategists. A lot of people go to their bank manager or to a normal mortgage broker who don't understand this. The concept is we help our clients buy time by having financial buffers in place. So if you, making up a number, could borrow 800,000 and you put 25, 30,000 of that aside for a cash flow buffer, and you had $750,000, $780,000 to buy your property, even if it was negatively geared, 5,000 a year, 10,000 a year, you bought yourself 2, 3, 4 years time till the rents go up, till interest rates get better. So it's actually structuring, and that's part of the strategic plans we put together for our clients at Metropole. So property investment's a game of finance. You've heard me say that before, with some houses thrown in the middle. So you've got to get the finance structures right to buy yourself the safety net of getting through the next couple of years. And most people, though, they want cash flow. Most people you read about here, the podcasts you read here, teach cash flow. But if you listen to who most people listen to, because if you do what most investors do, you're going to get the same results as them. And we know most investors never get past their second property. In fact, 92% never get past one or two properties. So if you think in cash flow, it's really more here and now rather than the long term. And you're buying properties to solve a short-term problem rather than the long-term results, what you're after. So residential real estate, to be blunt, is a high growth, relatively low yield investment. And that's why, as part of the strategic plans we put together for clients at Metropole, it's not just property. You actually need cash flow as well. So we either later in your journey, first asset-based growth, then cash flow. Sometimes it's commercial property. Maybe you need shares. Maybe you need your super, other things to supplement it. So property on its own, it's hard to get sufficient cash flow from. So it's all part of a strategy. And in fact, the property you eventually buy is going to be the conclusion of the physical manifestation of a whole lot of decisions you're going to have to make in the right order. So that was one question. Another question that I got recently, or as part of this, was Dan asked about the recent tenancy law changes in Queensland. Now, we know that the Queensland land tax has been repealed, so that's not a problem. But I guess there was a theme amongst a number of questions about governments targeting investors and using them as an ATM to help supplement their cash flow, the government's cash flow, and also the stricter residential tenancy laws. Yes, Queensland has just this month introduced a whole lot of stricter residential tenancy laws, and Victoria introduced 130 changes to the Residential Tenancies Act last year. Poor Leanne Jobs, now Director of Property Management. It's a national role. I was speaking to her on, where was in her office on Tuesday, the day after these new legislations came out, and she's making sure that all our leases are correct and all our procedures are correct. It's hard to keep up to date. And there are changes. There are changes about what you're allowed to do with having a pet or not, or people putting up hooks or getting rid of tenants. So we're going to actually be recording a separate podcast on that to help people. I can't go into the detail of it here, but yes, it's getting harder and harder to be an investor because this is a business and we are taking commercial risks. We're taking a risk borrowing. We're buying significant assets, and the government is not on our side when it should be. I wonder whether over the next couple of years, as the rental crisis gets worse, and it is, because we're allowing another 200,000 people into Australia in the next year, this financial year. And at the moment, there's 33,000 properties for lease in Australia. That's all advertised for lease. So half of those aren't even ready to come on the market yet. But as soon as a tenant gives us notice to vacate at Metropole, we put it on realestate.com and domain. So there's not enough accommodation for all these people. And the government can't provide it. So I wonder whether the governments are going to come around and suddenly realise, hey, we can't provide all this. We better give incentives to tenants, as landlords, to investors, to buy investment properties. It's going to be a change of their thinking because most of the governments are seeing people like you and me as ugly, greedy landlords who are taking advantage of the system. And that's not true. I mean, first of all, I can see you're not ugly. But the other thing is that basically we're not greedy either. Most investors only own one or two properties. So yes, the tenancy laws are bad, getting worse, making it harder. So you need a good property manager who's going to protect you. Don't even consider getting involved in property management. But interestingly, a new rule in New South Wales is, as property managers, we have to give tenants the owner's email address or a way of contacting them. That's never been the case before. We've been the buffer in between. Now there's this legislation that requires that. So yes, Dan, they're making it harder. But what's the alternative? I guess more people are going to actually say, this is just too hard and get out. which means that those who stay in the system, those who are going to have a long-term view on property investment, are going to get better returns. And they're talking about build to rent and commercial owners owning properties, super funds and other things. They're not going to accept the 2 and 3% yields you and I are accepting, because they can put it in commercial property or elsewhere. So they're going to want much better returns. So the government is going to have governments, state and federal, are going to have a whole lot of unintended consequences. So don't cop out, stay in the game. There was a question by somebody who I won't mention the name because it's actually a specific name and would be probably easy to recognise. But the other thing is she actually just emailed me in the last minute and she couldn't make it to the session. But she asked, will rising interest rates for first home buyers who took a grant, will that cause them now to have a crunch? Can we expect to see many first homeowners who stretched their belt suddenly lose their properties? And the answer is, overall, our property markets have a very low loan to value ratio. $9.7 trillion worth of real estate, residential real estate in Australia. It's dropped a bit from 10 trillion a few months ago. $2.1 trillion worth of loans only against all that real estate. So that's about a 24% loan to value ratio of the overall property markets, which means that in general, our markets are sound and there's very, very few loans in default. But that doesn't mean that some people who overcommitted, especially with some of those 5% deposits, didn't know what the real cost of owning a property would be. So there's the outgoings. In general, banks took into account that you had to be able to pay an interest rate buffer. You had to have an interest rate buffer of 3%. So interest rates had gone up 2.5% since some people borrowed. Theoretically, they should still be able to cope, but in reality, life gets in the way. Other costs have gone up, petrol's gone up, costs of living. So I believe there will be some hurt in the new home owner segment. Often it'll be in homes, some bought apartments as well. And that's one of the reasons that we avoid investing in those areas. We like investing in areas where people are not 1 or 2 weeks away from broke. Owner-occupiers and tenants. Because if you think about it, your future livelihood is going to be dependent upon your tenant's ability to pay more rent in the future. So we want to invest only in areas where the tenants have got strong incomes and aren't paying too high a percentage of their income in rent. And people rent not just because they can't afford to buy. There's a lot of tenants who rent just because of lifestyle, because they got divorced, because they get married, but because they're renovating their home, because they've moved to a new state, because they've got a new job. So we look at areas where tenants can afford to and are prepared to pay more rent moving forward. So yes, is there going to be some hurt in the first home buyer areas? Unfortunately, I think that's the case. I'm going to go through a few more of your original questions, because this question's a good one. Affordability, the area where I'd like to purchase, and I'm concerned we will not be able to purchase our own home without selling 2 investment properties. Also, the market's moving away from investor-friendly culture. Yeah, we've discussed that. We're not big-time rich investors, but a family wanting to generate passive income and create generational wealth for our children. Thank you very much. That's what most investors are. They're not ugly, greedy landlords. So you're right that the government is picking on us unnecessarily. But having said that, you're asking now, you're saying you may not be able to purchase a home without selling your investment properties. That's one of the challenges with rent vesting. A lot of people do rent vest. They rent where they start off, and then they actually buy investment properties and eventually want to own their own home. The problem is that you need quite a lot of equity. So part of what we do at Metropole when we put a plan together for you is map that out. So if you're going to rent vest and you want to buy your own home in the next 2, 3, 4 years, almost certainly the sums never work. Once you've got a lot of equity and a lot of rent coming in, then it may be easier. Or maybe sometimes you have to sell an investment property. So between where you are now and where you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years' time to retire, there's a number of ways of getting there. And an example I've been using for years is if you're using your phone and I want to go from Melbourne to Sydney, I'd put it in Google Maps, and you know what it's like. They give you 2 or 3 blue lines, different direction. You can go the fast way up the Hume Highway, or you can go the coastal road and stop off at Lorne and Lakes Entrance. Not Lorne, that's the wrong way. Lakes Entrance and the other places and enjoy it. Or you could go the toll roads, which are cheaper but more expensive. So if you're wanting to end up with your own home and a number of investments, we have to work out which is the most appropriate route for you. Some people are in a real rush and just want to get a big asset base. Others want to stop off and have kids or travel overseas or upgrade their home. So all that has to be put in a plan so that the plan will then allow you to know what to do and not get bamboozled by what's happening in the market. So I do not know the answer to your question for this lady whose name starts with an M who asked me this, but I think what we've got to do is numbers and figures and base a decision. Do you keep one investment? Do you keep both? Do you just sell one at the moment? Do you wait longer? I don't know, but it's got to be done not on gut feel, but on numbers and figures. Now, you're allowed to be emotional about your home, but you shouldn't be emotional about the numbers and figures about how you get there. Okay, Frank asked a question. I can't decide on whether I should purchase a property in Melbourne, Brisbane or the Gold Coast. I live on the Gold Coast, so Queensland property is more convenient, but Melbourne may provide better capital growth over the next 10 years, or maybe it won't. Okay, so the answer is the same whether it's Frank, who's kindly asked this question, or any of you. 3 things determine where, when we put a plan together for our clients, we recommend you invest. Number 1 is your budget. And that means that, well, that's controlled by the banks, really. So, for example, there was somebody today who I spoke with. He'd been seeing our property strategist, and we're about to start looking for a property for him. And he bought in Western Australia a number of years ago. He's not part of this call. He bought in Western Australia a number of years ago and used a Western Australian buyer's agent because that's all they ever told him. He lives in Perth. And he lost a lot of money and he felt he's missed out on a big opportunity. So he's understandably a little bit nervous, and he approached me. And even though I don't regularly deal with clients anymore, I specifically rang him and we actually did a Zoom call. And his budget doesn't allow Sydney. And his budget doesn't allow Melbourne, but it still gives him a good opportunity to buy in Brisbane. So the first thing we decide is what is the budget. The second is location, and we're not prepared to compromise on that. And then the third thing is the right property in that location. So I would rather buy a townhouse in a good location, not in Brisbane an apartment, but in Sydney apartments make great investments. And in Melbourne, they're now coming up as good investments as well. So the location's more important moving forward. Look, during COVID, we know that people moved out of apartments. They actually didn't want to live in apartments, and so they underperformed. But currently, as the market's dropping, apartments are not dropping as much. Affordability means that if people want to live in Bondi or Coogee or Elwood or St Kilda or New Farm and they can't afford a house, they'd rather have the location than understand the importance of neighbourhood. So they're trading space, bigger house land for place. So the question was about the Gold Coast. Well, I don't know what your budget is. And Queensland, while it's local and home, is actually the wrong reason to invest. Now, I don't know what other investments you've got. If you've already got a home there, even though it may not be income producing, if you live there, it's still going to give you growth. And so sometimes diversification is necessary as well. But I was fascinated a couple of years ago, 2 researchers from 2 separate universities in Australia followed up the success of people who invested in their own backyard. Because you would intuitively think, if I know my neighbourhood, if I know the better streets, if I know what's going around there, even if it's not the best place in the world to live, my insider knowledge would make me a better investor and I'd do better. And so while intuitively I didn't think that was the case, it was fascinating to see the statistics and figures which proved it wasn't the case. Actually, it reminds me, it's an old blog on Property Update. I've got to look up and probably see if there's any update on that, because it showed that investing in your own backyard isn't always the right answer. And in fact, it disadvantaged people because they look, everyone lives in a home or rents a home or apartment. So that we've got 25 million property experts in Australia, but we know the statistical results that 50% of people who buy an investment end up selling up over the first 5 years. They get it wrong. Now, Jeff, who is on this call, I know, and he's a client of Metropole, and he actually came to Wealth Retreat, but so he's a keen learner and improver. He said, my biggest concern is buying into a market that's already experienced considerable growth after a once-in-a-lifetime property boom. And Jeff, you're right. You should have bought 20 years ago, but you were a teenager then. You should have bought 40 years ago when I first started, but you weren't even born then. So my first property, I paid $18,000 for. I couldn't afford it, Jeff. I actually went half with my parents. I put down $1,000, they put down $1,000, and we got a 30-year loan for $16,000. Had no idea how we were going to pay it off. So, when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? When's the second best time today? It's the same. Yes, it would have been nice to do. Yes, some people have missed out on opportunity. And those people that we spoke to 2 years ago who missed out, some of you may even be on this call, I don't know. There's going to be people who we're speaking to today who in 2 years' time, when they look through the rear vision mirror, because the rear vision mirror always seems to be clearer than looking forward, they're going to realise, gee, I should have taken advantage of it again. Interestingly, I don't think I've ever bought a bargain other than this apartment that we live in. We live in a beautiful penthouse apartment, and it wasn't bought to be a bargain. It was actually the right circumstances with a motivated vendor at a time when the luxury apartment market in Melbourne wasn't doing well. But I've never gone away from a deal other than this. And I didn't even realise at the time because it was for our own home, so I was a bit emotionally involved. But I've never walked away thinking, oh, it's a deal of a lifetime. So I don't mind that you've missed out on the boom. It would have been nice to do it. You've got to take a long-term perspective. And if you believe, Jeff, that over the long term, I know you do, over the long term, the wealth of the nation and the fact that there's going to be so many more of us are going to push up property values, then you're doing the right thing. Remember, between now and 2030, not that long, the end of this decade, we're going to get to about 29 million people from 25.5 million people. So that's 3.5 million people in Australia you're already ahead of if you buy today. So yeah, forget the past opportunities. You're already ahead of 3.5 million others who are coming to Australia. And by the middle of the decade, we're getting to 40 million. They were talking about 50 million by the middle of this decade. So there's 15 million people, 25 million people, if you live long enough, that you're going to be ahead of if you get into the market now. So don't worry about missing it. And there will be another boom, but not for the next years. So therefore, you've got to find areas that outperform. And that's what our research department spends a lot of time doing. And it's based on demographics. Because moving forward, the markets are going to be very fragmented. Some suburbs are going to do better than others. They always have, based on the affordability of rents and accommodation. So we look at areas where people have got more income and where they're gentrifying the areas. And then we like manufacturing capital growth through renovations or development that's going to make the property market outperform. Paul left a question. Interest rates are searching for a new normal level. You're right. They're probably close to neutral now, Paul, but they will be higher. They will increase a bit to stifle inflation. Then they're going to lower again. That's what always happens. It'll be even more important to identify quality investment grade in prospective purchases. Exactly right, Paul. Do not count on the market doing the heavy lifting. So we use a top-down approach, which you've heard in the podcast. You've seen if you're working with us, of choosing we look forward. What's happening in advance? Which states are going to have economic growth, outperformance? Then within each state, which is the right suburb where the gentrifying large percentage of affluent owner occupies the right demographics? And then which areas are going to have stronger population growth, which is where jobs are going to be created, where wealthy people are going to come, skilled migrants are going to come. And then we look at areas where, therefore, that's going to create more demand for homes, for development, for rentals. And then we've got to choose the right property in there. So you're right. And that's why most people fail. And it's actually a combination of art and science. So the research is useful. I can make figures and research look like answer almost anything. So you've actually got to have the on-the-ground knowledge. So our team at Metropole have buyers agents who've been ex-selling agents. Well, they're still estate agents, but they're not selling anymore, who know why one side of the street is different to the other. Research won't show that. I mean, there's streets in Sydney where on one side of the street, you've got magnificent views of the Sydney harbour and the water and the bridge. And on the other side, you've got magnificent views of the houses and they've got magnificent views of the Sydney water and harbour and bridge. So you've got to get down to a street level and a house level. Manuel says, we live in regional Victoria. I'm concerned the price gap between regional and metro is going to become too large for us to have an option of buying back into the metropolitan areas. Yes, I think that regional Australia I know it's had a real boom during COVID. Why? Because people moved out of the big cities. And if you move, I think there were 15,000 people left Melbourne, but that's no big deal to a population of 5.5 million. Because, in fact, there was still huge rental shortages and the property market went up. It didn't affect the Melbourne market, but you put 300 people in one little country town, 200 in another, 50 in another, and it pushed it up. But that's not where the wages growth is going to be. That's not where the jobs growth is going to be. I'm not saying it's not a good place to live, but I can't see regional outperforming metro in the long term. And for that reason, yes, I don't know your financial circumstances. And if you live in regional Victoria and you want to get to the metro area now, maybe it's worth buying something in advance while you can today, even if it's an investment. But again, that's why we have to sit down and put a plan together to help you. One person who's got a unique name, so I'm not going to repeat it here, just so as not to cause any embarrassment, said, you're not concerned about the market, just don't know what to do next. That's not unusual at the moment, because what's happening is this, all these mixed messages. When the boom times happen, all the market, all the research, all the media was saying buy, 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 buy. In the difficult times, it's saying, don't buy, sit on the sidelines. And as the market turns, you're going to find the media is going to give a mixture of positive and negative messages. So what should you do next? Why not have a chat with the team at Metropole and put a plan together, work out where you want to be, and remember those couple of different routes I talked about on the Google Maps. Let's find which is the right route for you. And then all you've got to do if you've got a plan is you just got to follow the plan. We'll help you plan to become the person you plan to become. Morris asked about timing the market. You're not going to be able to time the market, and don't even try. And you also asked, why is Australia so much more expensive than other developed countries, making Australians the wealthiest per capita? It's a combination of things. And the Reserve Bank governor recently said it. What he said was, hey, it's not our fault with interest rates. Guys, it's your fault because of how you want to live. We live in a small group of capital cities, and we live in coastal areas, and we live in general, big accommodation, whether it's land or apartments that suits our lifestyle. So therefore, that's expensive because we all want to be close to the CBD, close to the water, close to the good public transport. And it's the cost of living in the best country in the world. And that's not going to change. It's only going to get more expensive over time. It also means that not everyone's going to be able to afford a home in the future. One last question on my list I've got here in front of me. And then, you've got a whole lot of other questions in the chat, so I want to answer those. The concern was buying overpriced properties in the wrong location. And Linda, who asked that question, that's a very sensible concern, because moving forward, not all properties will outperform. I mean, that's the way averages work. Some will outperform and some will underperform. So you need a framework and system to find investment grade properties. In my mind, any property can become an investment. You kick the tenant out, you kick the owner out, you put a tenant in, and suddenly it's an investment. But in my mind, investment grade is one that outperforms over the long term, creating, I guess, life-changing wealth in the long term, not in the short term, not in the hotspot way. And on that basis, my suggestion is that if you don't know which way to go, the best investment you can make is in getting a good team around you. Now, I know there's a few plugs for Metropole here, but the answer is I genuinely believe we can help people like Linda, because a recent audit, or actually it was 2 years ago now, of our clients showed, this is before the boom, showed that our clients were 7.3 times more likely to own 6 or more properties than an average property investor. We know that less than 1% of property investors own 6 or more properties, and our clients were 7.3 times more likely to do it. So therefore, that's giving you a level of safety and security in these challenging times not to get it wrong. Now, guys, I want to say thank you because you've put a couple more questions there in the chat. So I've got another 10 minutes. So let me quickly go through these. Next asked, do Metropole buyers agents select areas only where tenants have the ability to pay higher rents just to protect investments so we can transverse the interest rate cycle? Thank you. So the buyers agents implement the strategy that the property strategists make. So buyers agents have their own areas of expertise, but we go back a level, and so they implement the plan that we put together. And that, again, will depend upon your budget and upon your long-term plans, but it's the demographics of the area of tenants and owner-occupiers. So we buy the sort of properties that owner-occupiers want to buy, not because we want to sell, but they're going to push up property values around them, but also areas where tenants have not in rental stress and where tenants in general are going to be able to pay more moving forward. So the answer is yes. Is that areas we choose? In general, yes, because that's one of the tick boxes in our planning. Apartments don't traditionally provide strong capital growth. As Sydney and Victoria apartment prices increase significantly or just increase tenant demand. So the last decade, apartments have not performed as well as houses. In previous decades, apartments and houses grew similarly. Houses have always been more expensive, but if over a 5-year period in Sydney, houses grew 7%, apartments often grew 6.5, 6.8%. But in the last decade, because there was this huge overdevelopment, you go down any street, every street, there was new apartment buildings, there was an oversupply, in part fueled by lower interest rates, in part fueled by selling investments to overseas investors who put it on the rental market. Apartments have not performed as strongly. Recently, Harry Trugoboff, Australia's biggest developer, the owner of Meriton, said that to build new apartments, he's going to have to make them financially viable, any new project, apartments are going to have to cost 25% more to make them financially viable. So he's not starting new developments at the moment. Recently, Michael Matusik showed that over COVID, the cost of building high-rise apartments has gone up, I think, 63%. So the next round of apartments are going to cost more. And with all the problems with Opal Towers and other things, they're going to cost more for other reasons as well, more careful building practices. So apartments are going to, again, pick up in value. Having said that, not all apartments, because it's the land component, the land to asset ratio, that's one of the things we look at when we buy apartments. So we like buying the older, what we call flats, what used to be called flats, where there's maybe 10, 12. So if you've got a tenth of a block of land in Bondi or Coogee or Collingwood in Victoria, rather than 1/200th of it in a high-rise tower, you've got the right sort of investment. Okay, there was also another question here. In fact, I read out your question about moving from regional Victoria to Melbourne. So I understand your concern about Melbourne prices getting out of hand, but they're not going to zoom ahead. So the question is, what's the right thing for you to do, Manny? Should you actually sell up? Should you move now? Should you rent for a while and sell up? I don't know. That's where we need to do numbers and figures rather than gut feel. Not everyone's going to be able to afford to live in Melbourne, but Melbourne's a city that's so long and so wide and so high that there are alternatives. Could be a house, could be a townhouse, could be an apartment, could be in the inner city, could be in the outer suburbs. So I don't know the answer, but why don't you sit down with your Metropole property strategist and see what the right answer is for you. Susie, thank you for asking. With the new work from home culture, I thought regionals would be better than past indication. Some jobs will always be able to now work from home, but it in many ways is going to be a flexible hybrid model. People won't only work from home. It's interesting, if you think about it, we've always worked where our tools are. years ago, it used to be ploughing the fields, and we were an agrarian society. And then there was the manufacturing society. The tools, the machines were in the factories. And so we started to manufacture. So the inner suburbs became very popular. And then the photocopiers and computers were the expensive tools we used. So we moved to office buildings. Now it's laptops and smartphones. So the tools that we need, you can work from anywhere. So you are correct. But there's not just where you can work from. You've also got to go to the office for meetings, experiences, etc. So yes, there will not be a total reversal of the work from home in regional areas, but they're going to be in what I'd call commutable areas. So I know you're from Victoria, so we're talking about Ballarat and not even Bendigo, but Geelong. That would be commutable a couple of days a week. We're not going to get fast trains in the near future. Central Coast is pretty commutable. I know I had somebody from the Central Coast on the call a minute ago as well. But again, the major growth, where are those 200,000 people who are coming to Australia going to? They don't want to go to Coffs Harbour. They don't want to go to Cairns. They want to go to jobs where they can earn more, and those jobs where they can earn more is basically going to be in the big cities. So that's where the trend is. I don't fight the gorillas. Interestingly, a couple of months ago, I remember somebody spoke to me, part of my mentorship program. He said, "Hey, I'm in Cairns at the moment. It's really lovely here. Should I buy an investment here?" I said, "Why on earth would you do that?" I said, "If you walk down the streets," he said, "Yes." I said, "What are the shops there? What are they selling?" "They're selling T-shirts, they're selling hats, they're selling koalas for the tourists, and they're probably selling candy and hamburgers." No one's going to get overly rich from that. They're not high-paying jobs for people who go to Cairns. So you want people who are going to be able to earn more, pay more rent, pay more for you as a tenant, or buy properties and push up the value of things. So that's again why, even though there is a bit of a trend back to regional Australia, not as strong a trend as moving to the capital cities. Thank you for your comment, Manny. I understand what you're saying. Michael, what are the key mindsets a property investor needs when starting on an investment journey? Really good message. Question. Because a number of years ago, I remember I was being interviewed by somebody and they said, "What's the difference between successful property investors and the average person? Is it their knowledge? Is it that they got more money?" And I think it is their mindset. That's why I've for many years run a mentorship program. And in the old days when I used to do seminars at the convention centres, I'd always do a big session on mindset, and why in every podcast I have a mindset moment, because I believe the wealthy think differently to the others. So to answer your question, when you're starting with your question, the concept of educating yourself, but listening to the right people, and that's really, really hard to do. You've got to find out who you should be asking, because there's a whole group of new experts out there at the moment giving, well, look, I'm sure they're not unintentionally, they're not intentionally misleading people. But if you've only been around for a while, I remember reading on Instagram recently, one so-called big buyer's agent just had his 26th birthday. 3 years ago, he was in the mining towns. Now, he hasn't been around the block often enough to earn the right to give advice. So my comments are that be careful who you listen to with advice. The next thing is understand the concept of delayed gratification. You are where you are now because of all the decisions you've chosen to make and the decisions you've chosen not to make. So your decisions now are either an investment in your future or taking away from your bank account and your assets in the future. In other words, if you buy a car now, you're going to have less to invest. If you invest in assets now, you'll have you're investing in your future. So my suggestion is read our book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, and that's going to be the best $30 you're going to spend. richhabitspoorhabits.com, or go to Kindle and get it for $9.99. It's actually been translated into Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Polish. The Russians actually recently approached me, a Russian publisher, but I've chosen, with all the stuff that's going on overseas, even though it's a small private company, not to allow it. There's 2 other foreign languages as well. So learn the habits of wealthy people. and actually stand on the shoulders of your mentors, and you're going to see a lot further than that. Only one last question, and I've got time for, but interesting, it looks like it's the last one anyway. Migrants coming into Australia will choose Metro in case other employers in the future prefer centrally located staff. Hybrid model working from home and office space are the key. My organisation just imposed a 3-day office week for cultural reasons. Thank you, Dexter. So I think the comment there was that migrants are going to come to the capital cities, and yes, companies are now starting to impose a work from office culture. It's very difficult to keep culture going, and as a boss with 80-something employees, I understand that. We have 3 offices in Australia and 1 in Clark in the Philippines, and it's important for us to work as a team together to help our clients. And so if people can work from home, for me, they can actually work from home anywhere else too. So it's harder to keep employees. It's harder to keep them understanding what we're trying to do to help our clients. So I think you're right there, Dexter. It is going to be more getting back to the office in a hybrid model moving forward. Wow, we covered a lot in that session, didn't we? But I promised you that was going to happen. And I guess part of the message from this is that we are experiencing wild times in our economy and our property markets. Clearly, decreasing affordability is causing properties to fall in value. There's a significant rise in mortgage rates. The media is still full of stories that the property markets are going to fall further, but I hope I've given you some clarity on my thoughts about that ahead. And clearly, the rental markets are tightening and rents are going up. But in times like this, I believe it's important to have a strategy. I hope that message came across, to have a plan and not to be an emotional investor. The more prepared you are, the more you're going to be able to take the emotion out of your investing. Especially as many experienced economists, not just me, are expecting our housing markets to turn next year, maybe even in the first quarter of next year. So if you're looking for a proven, time-tested strategy for 2023 and beyond, one that's got a long, strong track record, please have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au, or I'll leave a link in the show notes, and have a chat with them, because I firmly believe the property investment process is a process. As I was trying to say in my question and answer session, it's not an event. And the eventual property you're going to purchase will be the physical manifestation of a whole lot of very important decisions that you're going to have to make, but you're going to have to make them in the right order. And I also know that my team at Metropole can provide you with a time-tested, proven framework that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades. By the way, can I show off a bit? We've recently won 2 awards from International Finance Derivatives magazine, actually the 4th year in a row, Most Trusted Property Investment Consultant in Australia 2022 and the Best Property Investment Consultants in Australia in 2022. We've invested through times like this. So if you're still interested in property, be it as an investment or your home, please have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au, leave your details, and we'll have a talk with you and discuss your options. Let my team help you. And remember, we've got no properties for sale, so our advice is independent and unbiased. Now, this was a longer show than normal. I'll be back with a more regular show real soon. You can catch me in between on social media, or go to the private Facebook group. Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And why not join me every day? I'll leave a tip, a trick, some information. And I've even got a bonus for you, my way of saying thank you for subscribing to this podcast. Just go to podcastbonus.com.au and get a collection of ebooks and reports. Now, if you enjoyed this show and you're a new listener to this, go back to some of the old shows, because there's lots of gold there from my various guests. But I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?